1,000 years ago, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago. When the tribe rejected us, it was like death. It was a sentence to death. And we need tribe. That's why the commune, the kibbutz, and the tribe, and these intentional communities are formed. And in order for it to survive, in order for you to even have a community, you need to learn how to communicate.
And good afternoon, everyone. I had so much positive feedback. Dan Schultz, moving into the positivity with the changes and offering solutions, discussing some of the problems and things that we're facing. And there's been such an uptick, even in the last 6 months since we went around our last interview here. But the problems we face are all in your face. And when I say that, it's not a slang term, in your face, but it's so obvious for everybody to see now that systems are broken. They're not being repaired. The systems that we know as were efficient are now inefficient. The delays, the economy, the inflation, the lack of food, which I'm going to talk about here with the fertilizer reductions coming in next year, which are absolutely going to impact yields globally. So we'll need to take some solutions for our self-sustainability on that. I was like, everywhere you look, you can see the facade has shattered, and it's kind of looking through a glass window now at the farce that has been the last 100 years of what we consider our society and commerce, the wastefulness around us, from government to NGO to so many other things that are now political pawns. And those who have eyes to see, as you mentioned, it's so obvious that there has to be a change. And I really believe that no later than probably the beginning of 2023, maybe at the very middle July of 2023, the perception of saving or planning for the future like we do now, save for your retirement savings. You're 30, you got to start thinking about retirement. That will no longer exist, even as a fleeting thought, as we get into the now for survival and moving through these vast changes of the grand solar minimum, the restructuring of governments, and the complete overhaul and restructuring of an economy, the global level economy. So with all these things that will be happening in short order here, the now will be a thing that everybody will live in versus into the future. I mean, when I say future, it might be near-term future, year, 2 years, but nothing as we look out 40, 50 years from now to try to get ready for living a dream, sitting on a beach, drinking margaritas when you're 30 versus using the money when you're 30 to go run around the beach as one of the super strong body and enjoy life to its fullest, versus waiting till you're 70 so you can go literally just sit on a beach because you're too old to go run around and enjoy climbing the mountains, jumping in the waterfalls, whatever that entails. So there's a lot of things happening. And the world, we know, is shifting right in front, and it's going to shift much more intensely in these next year. So, Dan, I'm glad you came back on. We were talking before the show about some fertilizer, and I wanted to pick your brain on that. So, welcome back. And how have you seen the world change even in the last 6 months? I mean, there's stark movements that are starting to appear more and more that can't be denied.
It can't be denied. And I really think it's beneficial to frame this in paradigm shifts. And paradigm shifts have been a theme in my life, but I think increasingly in everybody's life. There's so many. I mean, my biggest paradigm shift was going from allopathic thought to holistic thought, the medical model. We have a surgeon general. You grow up, you take a baby aspirin when you have a fever when you're a kid. You go to the doctor when you're sick. I mean, we live in a medical culture. And that changed for me when I found holistic thought was an awakening for me. But there's been so many. I mean, now we have going from a nuclear sun, plasma cosmology, from linear to cyclical, as we talk about quite a bit. I used to think America's, I sang the Star Spangled Banner at my wedding. I was a red-blooded American who thought America was the greatest planet on the earth, or greatest country on the planet. And I'm a little embarrassed by that now. The paradigm has shifted. There isn't even America. There's oligarchs and corporations and the people that run the planet. America is a facade. There's so many. 9/11 was a paradigm shift, and I was duped like most people. I wanted to get those terrorists. I really did. I'm embarrassed to admit that. It took, some people showing me, hey, look at this, to see that 9/11 was a completely different scenario. When I had kids going from public schools to homeschool to unschooling, there's so many paradigm shifts, and maybe one of the biggest in my life and more applicable to what you and I are doing is at one time I was a fiercely competitive athlete. Winning was everything. It was everything. I didn't go to college to go to college. I went to college to go to the Olympics, and it was everything. And now it seems so silly. I remember being really important if the Raiders won. It seems so silly to me now. But this competitive to a cooperative paradigm is a big deal. This rugged independence to we're all in this together is more applicable than it has ever been. And I think at my Trail Mountain Village, the way that shows up is we practice a paradigm shift in communication. So, NVC by chance? Nonviolent communication?
No, maybe I do, but maybe by a different name. Explain that to me full. Can you flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah, it's Marshall Rosenberg's work. It's called Nonviolent Communication or Compassionate Communication. And it is an absolute paradigm shift when it comes to interpersonal communication. So I'm not going to give a seminar on it, but essentially what almost all of us have learned our entire life, we are steeped in it, is blame, labels, criticism, and analysis. If there's something that comes up, some type of conflict, I'm going to label you as lazy or inconsiderate or some label. Generally, we don't take responsibility for our emotions. We blame that person. They made me mad, right? That's what we learned. You made me mad. You hurt me. We don't take responsibility, and we don't give people responsibility for their own emotions. And so the technology of NVC, beautiful. We have 5 copies of the book. It's strongly suggested reading at our place, but we practice it on a weekly basis. And instead of blame, labels, analysis, and criticism, you learn it to be feelings and needs based. And it's a way of expressing, but it's so much more than that. It is a way for you, first of all, to completely take responsibility for your emotions, to give people responsibility for theirs. It's a way to resolve conflicts. And it's a way to get what you want. Like we all have the same needs, and we need to get those needs met. And so there are probably a lot of ways, communication technologies that you can get from point A to point B. In my estimation, NVC is, it's beautiful. And of all the things, we've had 350 woofers in our place. And of all the things that people write me back 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years later, they write me back and say what impacted them the most was our heart club that we practice every week. And they'll bring it to appreciations and withholds and admissions, acknowledgements, and the ability to share from the heart and build trust. Because as we've been talking about, as we go through all these changes, and as I argue, inevitably inevitably, the grid is going down. That is the inevitability that I see. There are a lot of permutations. The world is going to get colder. We're going to have climatic changes, extremes, but in the end, the grid is going down. I'll talk about that more later.
Yeah, for how long Dan, how long do you think it might go down? Grid down for me, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months. That's easy to overcome. Well, not easy, but doable. But a permanent or a multi-year grid down is something quite different to deal with.
They are very different. And we can't necessarily, be rigid in our expectations of all these different permutations of the crises that can happen. Everything's on the table. We've been surprised at just all the crap that's happened right now. But my point is that when these systems collapse, they're in free fall collapse right now. It might be a controlled demolition collapse, but essentially, we need to learn to work together. And having a community, we touched on this in the last podcast, that it's the people. You can't go it alone. The people that go it alone, the reason why we don't like rejection as a human being is because when our tribe rejected us 1,000 years ago, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago, when the tribe rejected us, it was like death. It was a sentence to death. And we need tribe. That's why the commune, the kibbutz, and the tribe, and these intentional communities are formed. And in order for it to survive, in order for you to even have a community, you need to learn how to communicate. So anyways, I'm always an advocate of, I won't go too far into NVC. I'm always an advocate. We touched on this a little bit last time of books. You can't know everything. You cannot know everything. It's a lifelong journey of knowing. I'm an advocate of finding books on things. And one of my major, on the top 5 anyways, is Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. You can go on YouTube and watch some of the videos watching him use the tool of NVC. But when you can learn, and it's not easy, it sounds so easy. It sounds easy to communicate feelings and needs, and there are more nuances and subtleties to it. But it's something you have to practice. You have to practice being out of analysis, criticism, blame, and labels. You have to practice being in, listening with it and speaking with it. And communities, our brains are made to trust. That was one of my insights into indigenous communities that I lived with. They trust each other inherently, implicitly. It is woven into the fabric of their culture. Everyone around them you trust. You and me and all of these other people around us, almost nobody knows that. I mean, maybe you got some great parents and your family's tight, but having a tribe, everyone around you that you trust, and our brain is made for that. So my point in this is that in America anyways, in most of the West, even the news will condition you out of that, out of trust. And we have to unlearn and relearn how to communicate in a way that builds cohesiveness and cooperation and trust. And then our brains and our lives will be right. And as I argue, to make it through all of these changes, we have to have that cohesiveness. David?
How fast can it turn on for the average person to unlearn and relearn what they do? Because these changes I'm talking about and you're seeing and the world's feeling, everybody feels intuitively. And again, they're coming back to the tribe and just the basic survival instincts. I think that's why nearly every person on the planet feels currently something's amiss. Now that is a survival instinct for us. We wouldn't still be here if we all didn't cohesively understand that there's a great impact coming, a great change. We all need to act together to move through it. So some of these, what we consider woo-woo topics of being able to sense things in the future, to sense things as a collective, It's all heightened and all turned on across every culture, every continent, across the entire planet. It's all happening at once right now, where people are just saying, something doesn't feel right. Maybe I should, and then fill in your action on the blank there.
Mhm.
No, when people come together, how quickly will these old habits fall away? Because, a couple people out of my farm out here, and then what if 20 people show up, and then, there's always going to be somebody trying to vie for power to be the leader in those, even though it's your house and your farm, I'm going to be the leader, and even deciding daily tasks, because at that point, when calories are not going to be as easy to come by as just walking down to the supermarket and plunking your money down there, if it really comes down to the shortages that are envisioned, where things might cut off, grid, transportation systems, etc., lack of fertilizer coming in, that selection is going to be less, and it's going to be way more expensive. So the calorie burnt for an objective done, a task finished, to create more value or rebuild the food stocks, water, whatever it would be, lumber, anything, heat. For the wood, those task delegations, people are going to be arguing about, well, I don't want to do, well, we really, you have way more knowledge and experience with this. So I'm just asking, if at all, let's say things go haywire here in 3 to 4 months, and then people really do start looking for communities like yours and mine and Diamonds, and then Ben's over there, and there's a whole bunch of other ones around as well. So they're going to start finding and going to these places for safety. At that point, how quickly can it really be organized without a bunch of infighting from people who are traumatized from the changes and haven't expected, and truly it blindsided, or it caught them so far off guard that psychologically they're going to be just in trauma anyway from all the changes, that it's just going to be devastating for most people coming into that situation, to readjust in a group to be able to make change and forward. I'm looking how these steps are going to unfold here. They might have to run from their houses in the middle of the night, leave everything behind, no cash, and roll up plea. Then what? How people are really going to change?
You make an excellent point. And I'm not against leadership. I'm not against being a leader. But you know this as well as I do. There's different ways to lead. Even in relationship, there can be an emotional leader. There can be someone with vision. There can be people who know foraging and different expertise. And it's the new math of 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 17. When everybody steps up and are empowered. I mean, that's just it. That was that was a theme when I learned allopathic to holistic. The allopathic model is one of dependence. It's one of disempowerment. Oh, you've got allergies. Take this antihistamine and you're dependent on the rest of your life. And let's treat the symptom, and you have to rely on me to. And then you have the holistic model that is all about empowering people. It's about you healing yourself. And the same way with community, if everybody is empowered. Now, you're making a good point here, how quickly, especially in crisis. But you know what? In a crisis scenario, boom, everybody's scared. Yes, maybe somebody steps up and is an emotional leader in some way, or leaders in other ways. But in the end, in order to stay together, you have to practice. You have to practice it. It's not going to turn around in a week. I've been practicing NVC for almost 12 years now. Old habits of blame, label, criticism, and analysis are tough to get away from. I fail regularly, but I practice it and I come back to it. And in the end, to me, it is an absolute truth that when we are all empowered and we're working cooperatively, we build trust, we build cohesiveness, we are going to survive and be efficient. I wrote an article for Communities Magazine called Humanity versus Efficiency. Like, you're right. Hey, we could disagree on David wants to put the compost bin 20 feet over there, and I want it 20 feet over here. Well, and maybe you just, we talk about it, and you just don't feel heard. Maybe we need to process that. That can be inefficient. You feel somebody feels insecure, or they feel slighted in the conversation. It's not efficient. Dictatorship is efficient. communist. The Chinese Communist Party is efficient, but
Well, somebody might have a more efficient way. Okay, well, if you're going to do this much, then the radius from here, because most of there's 17 trips to this part over here and only 3 trips to there, and the way you go save 200 steps each way, and think how many calories that is. We could do math behind it,
right. And you know what? In the long haul, considering people as human beings, including them as human beings, and coordinating as human beings, sometimes takes. That's why at our Heart Club meeting that we have weekly, we have an opportunity to express what's true for us and what kind of feelings and needs are being met, and it's both cathartic. We get to be human beings, and we get to know each other better and understand what makes us tick. And I think in the end, one of the things that's designed to build is empathy. How can you really have a great human experience and empathy? We live in a sociopathic society. I listened to a whole tape series once about sociopaths. It was really disturbing to me. Like, 1-2% of the population, some people say 3% of the population, are sociopaths. And I thought, I've never met a sociopath. And by the time I was done listening to it, I thought, am I a sociopath? My friend told me, sociopaths don't worry about being a sociopath. But
yeah, it's everybody on TV that you see is one.
Yeah, well, and politicians, and and we live in a sociopathic society, and that rubs off on us in certain ways. We become numb because of the news. And in order to really embrace our humanness and the tribe, empathy, and for me, it's NVC. It's nonviolent communication. So some type of practice that we get, we can't just be worker bees. We're not bees. We're human beings. And we're not only human beings, but we're human beings that have been trained, for all of us in America, where we don't even know our neighbors, let alone trust them. And that just has to be built. It's something that has to be practiced and built.
And I'll say for sure that people gardening together are having so much fun, tilling the soil, putting the thing, getting all watered down. That is something that bonds everybody together. And so far, every time it's been planting or harvesting or something, it's just been a bunch of laughs, a bunch of joy together, people helping. Planting is one of the things that, I don't know what it is. Everybody comes together and there's no arguing or anything, except maybe like, hey, make sure you don't put the rake down that way so you step on it, hit you in the face like a cartoon character or something. But otherwise, planting is just everybody's just so tuned in at that point because the hands are in the soil. Sometimes people taking their shoes off and the decompressing and those kind of energies that don't normally leave our bodies. For most, I would say a majority of the people living in the United States, very few people walk out barefoot onto their own land that's, like you say, mountainous. Like you have a fair few acres, I have some acreage. Most people are in a city with rubber shoes on all the time, and they get all angsty, and it's really difficult to decompress some of that energy by allowing or rolling, just laying on the grass and allowing these energies to come out. But I find that when planting, getting that charge out of your body by the earth itself, and people putting hands in the soil and the smells of the soil, something real primal about that. And not a lot of people get that are living in cities or even in suburbs that come on out to help or whatnot.
In our place, it's firewood. That's kind of our community.
Yeah, building fire, that's another hugely amazing thing. You get a small fire starting, we need some more wood. And they'll go not miles around, but they'll go like sweeping the periphery of the property, looking for pulling stuff. I was burning it. Yeah, the fire is primal too.
Yeah. But you talk about this a good bit. I'm speaking to the maybe 30, 40, 50% of the audience that isn't sure what's going to happen. Well, in a lot of ways, we're all not sure. But this is I'm about this whole management of a situation. I'm very practical, and I'm very humanist. And the practical part of me says, when you look at the patterns, the cycles and the patterns, there are lots of things that could happen. You've got you talked about the gas giants being on one part of the solar system, it changes the magnetic field. The big pattern, the biggest pattern is that our magnetosphere is declining. It's not only declining, it's not declining on a linear, it's declining on a parabolic pace. That means an acceleration. We're already 25%, about 25% down from 1859 in the Carrington event. What this means, if you don't, it's solid science too. This isn't like two people drinking moonshine in Tennessee who are on a discussion forum. This is solid science. Ben Davidson highlights this. You can go through the scientific paper after scientific paper. The evidence is clear. Our magnetosphere is waning. This is a big deal. This very well may be a bigger deal than the grand solar minimum. And the declining magnetosphere inevitably means that even an M-class solar flare, a small solar flare, will melt every copper wire on the planet. That sounds hyperbole, maybe to some, like, oh, melt every copper wire. The 1859 event, Carrington event, ignited telegraph wires all over the United States, shocked the operators. We would have been sent in the Stone Age on average. What is it, like 140, 150 years, we get one of those X-class solar flares. That's just a natural event that happens on a regular basis on average. We're already overdue for a Carrington event. It could happen tomorrow on a natural basis. When you add in some country could blow off EMPs and completely take down our grid, that's real. We're on a war cycle. There's cycles for everything. When Taurus when Uranus transits Taurus, astrologically, we have a war. 84-year cycle. 84 years ago, we had World War II. 84 years before that, we had the Civil War. 84 years before that, we had the Revolutionary War. So we're on that.
And where do we sit today in that transit?
Oh, big time.
In the same bullseye zone, don't we?
Same bullseye zone. The World Economic Forum promises us stuff, and it happens. And what are they promising us now? Christian Westbrook and Ice Age.
The Great Reset and the Great Narrative.
Well, they're promising us a cyber attack. Klaus Schwab says it will make the coronavirus pandemic look like a minor disturbance. He says they're promising us a cyber attack and grid down. So no matter how you slice this, inevitably through a solar flare because of our magnetosphere declining, but in so many other ways. Mark my words. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, I guarantee it won't be the last, because we will have a grid down. And maybe you're right, David. Maybe they do a cyber attack and they only leave it down for a month, shake us all up so we get into the greater reset. Or maybe it's 2 years. Maybe the Chinese and North Koreans blow off a bunch of EMPs and we're back to the Stone Age. And all you have to do is use your imagination and just imagine life without electricity. It's a hell of a ride, as things degenerate into warlords or who knows. There'll be pockets of people that keep their compassion and their reason and keep their humanity through all this. And, but regardless of how you look at that scenario, all of the things that David talks about, foraging. Recently on one of your podcasts, you were talking about distilling alcohol, making rubbing alcohol. All of this stuff. My first recommendation, I talk to people all the time about this. My first recommendation is just start doing something. Maybe you want to make rubbing alcohol. That's the first thing that you do. It's one of my favorite, Bill Mollison. He has 12 permaculture principles. And I think it's his third. One of his principles is obtain a yield.
You'd mentioned that before.
Yeah, it means, to me, yes, that's in the realm of growing food, but it's bigger than that. To me, it's really a metaphor that, if you live in an apartment in a city, even if you live rurally, all of these things, and the changes are happening so fast. There's an acceleration of everything. If you're not getting ready, your head's not in the game. And the reason why I like to frame this situation to manage in these ways is that it's just time to act, time to start growing food, time to start growing community, time to start, learning all of the skills to get ready. Otherwise, you're going to be in a reactive state. It's going to freak you out. You're going to panic. Who knows what's going to happen? David?
I'm going to disagree with you. Good. Because making moonshine is a science. Very clean science on temperatures, ratios, batches, and then percentages. But I'll do it old school style, and just like the old time dudes here, they shake the bottle to kind of see what the proof is. The more bubbles in the bottle, the higher the proof. And that's no joke. Like these old time guys, the way they do it, they're not really, putting the hydrometer in there to see what the alcohol content is. They're just shaking the bottle. And, oh, the bubbles are still pretty big. It must be about 130. And then I ended up getting 10 pounds of non-GMO cornmeal from the Amish before they just closed. So even for us living out here in the countryside, Amish closed down for the rest of the season. So they're not going to be back open until March again. A lot of people's plan was, if the supermarket like Costco doesn't have anything, if XYZ doesn't have anything, I'm going to go to the farmer's market and I'm going to go to the Amish. Well, for these next 4 months, there's no farmer's markets either. They won't start kicking off until March, and they'll probably just have supple leafy greens. That's all they'll have, because that's pretty much what comes on first here that you'll start to see at the farmer's markets. So I ended up getting 10 pounds of non-GMO cornmeal, and I got the yeast here, got the sugar, got 50 pounds of sugar. And I got extra sugar stored aside for this very purpose. And I got the still out there, temperature controlled, 165, take the heads off of that. And once everything stops distilling at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, then you turn it up to 175. And then that's where you get the drinkable alcohol run out of that. And that'll taper off. And you got to kind of, would say like cardboardy. You'll just know when it's finished. It has sort of a cardboard taste, smell. It's definitely changed at the ends where you get the tails. Well, then you start saving those two, and since neither of them are drinkable, you just combine them. I know they're gonna distill at different temperatures again, but triple distillations, and then but that means you need to run 3 full batches of regular moonshine run or schnapps. You got the pears, you got the apples. There's a lot of apples coming in season right now. You could do a fruit batch just like they do in Europe more than they do in the US. But think about where your ingredients are going to come from as some of these channels are cut off. So one of our main supplies, which was the Amish farm for all things nice going into the belly that we can't provide ourselves, like the sheep. So I ended up buying a 105-pound lamb over there. And, we stocked our freezer with that. But they had sold out of their lambs. So we went to go get one just last week to see if we could get another, bring us through the winter season here. And he's like, Wolves got 4 of them, which they were planning to sell. And then they had sold the others. But let that sink in for a second. These groups of families have done this for 150 plus years here. Mm-hmm. They're masters at what we consider almost alchemy to get plants to grow. Absolutely. In things that are seemingly impossible that they're able to pull off, from gravity fed water systems transiting miles over hillsides in old rusty pipes and things that you think that who would ever use that kind of stuff, to getting the most magical foods out of seemingly soils that aren't really that rich. But animal husbandry is one of their key things as well, because they do raise the sheep. Now, for them to have the guard dogs out there at all times and them themselves looking for predators, for wolves to come in and snag 4 of their lambs for the year over this last 2 months, that's unheard of. Even they were saying that it seems that nature is over hungry And
repellent.
the amount of ladybugs also that had come out during this late season warmth here. Oh my, everybody was talking about just literally how many, way over the normal amount there were. And the carpenter bees, I like to call them wood bees because they eat everything out of your wood. The carpenter bees here, again, the same thing. Everybody's talking about how voracious and ferocious and unbelievable numbers and never ending just onslaught of these carpenter bees this year.
Yeah.
And it's just been one thing after another, indicating that nature's also alerting itself, and we as humans probably miss those signals, that if the wolves are willing to come in, or I should say the coyotes are willing to come in that deeply way into the Amish farms to try to snag a sheep, knowing that they're in danger themselves. Because everywhere around here, anytime you see a coyote, shoot it on sight. And I know a lot of people don't agree with that, and they say, well, that's so inhumane. No, it's not. When they're taking the dogs, the chickens, the goats, the sheep, and when you get into a pack of them, if there's a very small newborn calf, they'll try to take that too. So around here, it's open season on coyote all the time, anytime, everywhere you see it, backyard, front yard, anywhere you can get on a clear line of sight. Obviously, be careful with your firearms. Can't just be blasting off anywhere. But if you can take a coyote out safely without, sending shrapnel somewhere else into your neighbor's, wall or whatnot, then do it, because they're a predator here, and there's a huge amount of them up and down the valleys too. Like the coyotes have gone overboard in the numbers this year in terms of how close they come in, because normally they know that they're hunted on the spot. The reason I told you that is these coyotes are smart. They're like dogs. They know every time they come in with sight of a human, they're shot at. But they were willing to go into the middle of the Amish farm and get those sheep and still risk their lives, knowing that the danger that's posed by getting anywhere remotely close to human habitation. And their whatever instinct is overriding another instinct. Their self-survival instinct of knowing a human means death for them or their family or whatever it is. How many of coyotes have been killed? Thousands up and down the valleys here. They know every time they see a human, a gunshot rings out and one of their pack dies. They were willing to override that to go in to get the food this year. Like one primal instinct was overridden by another. And it really begs to, what's going on here with nature in itself? What can we learn from that where one primal instinct will override another primal instinct?
I'd like to appeal to the audience who, the portion of the audience who, is maybe on the edge and maybe is not, for most Americans, are not comfortable taking the dive into a more natural life or a sustainable, self-sufficient life. I mean, I've had people say, I don't want to be a prepper. And, we talked about this last time. I always say too bad.
Yeah, right.
But, the thing about it is when you embrace this natural life, whether it's foraging or alcohol making, any of the things that you talk about all the time, and I talk about all the time, the way that we live at Maitreya Mountain Village, is that the thing is that it is so satisfying. I'll tell you why. I think that we have made an abstraction. We're not into reality anymore. The monetary industrial system has removed us from our humanness in some ways and removed us from nature. I mean, somebody wrote a book called Nature Deficit Syndrome. You don't even have to read the book. The title tells you what it's about.
Living in a city.
We all have it. And, but, the deep part of that is that, people like to eat chicken. But if you're uncomfortable killing a chicken, then your food has become an abstraction. If you're a part of an online community, then community has become an abstraction to you. Even though you could make I get the argument. If germs and mice and manure, if manure is yucky, dirt is dirty, and germs are a fear thing, then your actual biome has become an abstraction. And when you embrace killing a chicken, if you are a meat eater, when you embrace germs and soil and manure, there's something real about life. And, I've always said that my favorite movie of all time is The Matrix. And when Morpheus said, there's something wrong with the world, it's like a splinter in your mind. And you're born into a world that you can't taste or touch. It's this paradigm, this abstraction that we live in, where we're divorced from nature and humanity. And when you start living in ways where you're doing something as simple as procuring your own heat, your firewood, you're growing the marigold, you're growing a tomato. I'm somebody who 13 years ago, I never grew a tomato, a flower in my life. I was a suburb, eating out at restaurants. Most of my diet was organic, but I didn't know anything. I never grew anything in my entire life, not even a flower. I never had pots in my apartment when I was in school. And it's quite a journey to go from that divorced life to starting to embrace this natural, in many ways, the natural world is one of surviving. This is what people have done. Getting through winter is a big deal. We survived through winter. We worked hard in the fall. We harvested, we preserved, we canned, we salted, we smoked, we dried. All of those things, in the midst of the imperative of surviving, you will find tremendous satisfaction. That is one of my messages. Because people think of being a prepper as a hard life. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be suffering. And I'm here to tell you that it is a deeply soulful, satisfying life. We were just commenting the other day because it's getting dark. And one of our new members said, I used to, when I lived in my house, I used to stay up until 11:30, noon, 2 o'clock in the morning, doing crafts. She didn't have TV, but I stayed up until, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And now we sleep with the natural cycles. When it gets dark at 5 o'clock, most people turn in for the day. Now she sleeps like 10 hours. And I think it's natural to sleep for 8, 9, 10 hours during the winter. It's dark when you have artificial lights, which we do have lights, but we turn in, we live with natural cycles. When you live with the seasons and the weather and the cycles, even the daily cycles, there's a being in tune with nature in a way that a person who lives with a climate controlled building with lights, they stay up until midnight, they binge watch Lost in Space or some other, they're on Netflix until 1 o'clock in the morning. It is an unnatural cycle that leads us, I argue, it leads us to obsession and addiction and discontentedness because you are out of tune with natural cycles.
That's deep. Yeah, and speaking of an abstraction here, I want to tell you a story. I got cameras put up around the property so we could obviously see who's coming in. If there's anything poking its head around at night. And when we put the camera in, it was still pretty clear. There were a few branches hanging over. And for me, it didn't register, but the guys who were helping me put the camera in went up with a pair of, pruners and went and snipped a couple branches, but they snipped a Japanese honeysuckle. And a friend of mine had been here not just days earlier and had been wild foraging around and dug up some roots to make tinctures from and cut a few things to scrape some bark and all this. So when I saw him hit that specific plant, knowing you can make a tea out of it, he cut another plant. I said, well, I'm not really familiar with that one. What can you use that for? And he looked at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, you cut the Japanese honeysuckle. I thought you were just wild foraging, you're going to take some stuff home with you, feel free and cut as much as you want and take back with you, natural remedy, whatever. Natural forest is a huge free supermarket out here. And he looks at me and he goes, no, I was just clearing the line of sight for the cameras. But his worker that was with him was, all right, man, we're at a different level here. And it really was like something I perceived as a different context in it, trimming the tree to actually take a medicinal or take something that was a tea for a sore throat off of the plant. I thought he was really wild harvesting because, I was in that mind frame of thinking about what could be taken, eaten, used. So anytime something's trimmed, then it's a usable. I'm like, all right, cool. But it just didn't dawn on me that they were just trimming the tree line to make a clear line of sight. I mean, it did afterward and we had a good laugh about it, but those two different worlds are going to connect or collide or, meet in the middle here somewhere real soon and real short. So, going from mind frame like that on the outside of, I never even wild harvested anything once in my life, like you were talking about, all the way over into, all right, it's a thing in the spring. I'm waiting for the natural vegetation to come back. And then another thing that's out of sync here, it's going to be 72 degrees next week. And the plants have already gone dormant. So for 4 days, it'll be in the high 60s, low 70s, bright sunlight for 4 to 5 days next week, going into the 20th of December. So, how are the plants going to respond to that? Like last year, we lost all the wine vines because we put them in, they started throwing leaf, and then we had this incredible super freeze come in for 4 straight days, killed everything we lost all the blooms. There was no fruit this year, barely down of anybody's farms around here, or we were getting these little tiny cherries because the first year plantings and the dwarf varieties. Nature's throwing curveballs. Humans are being thrown curveballs. And with the magnetosphere waning, you just have to think about how is that going to affect the human perception or the human psyche, because we're right in that magnetic coupling of magnetic hemispheres of the brain. We live on a magnetic thing called the crust with a different charge than the atmosphere. And then we have the whole encapsulated driver of that changing itself, which would explain why the cloud cells and the jet streams are moving. Weaker magnetosphere, things aren't locked in as tightly, and the pressure systems aren't wrapping in and staying in the usual areas they would set up for whatever season. And things are almost spinning around. There's a high pressure over Greenland right now, but that blocking high pressure is forcing cooler air further down, Texas, Mexico, Florida here. But as it spins around the high pressure, it's almost looping all the way clear back to the point where there's going to be a giant vortice in the atmosphere. If it goes another 1,000 miles back to where it seems to be pinging off, it'll turn in. And you'd have to wonder, are some of these events recorded in history where you get a break off of that and it'll start circulating on itself and creating its own weather pattern? And these are the things that are setting up as we look right now. So as we progress into that magnetic field you're talking about with the gas giants lining up, in earnest, the Earth will be 100% locked in that through the middle of 2025, starting Q1 of next year. So no later than March. It depends. It's a few days here, a few days there. You determine it on where your line is, where Jupiter swings past the Earth. Where they're both moving. One's moving faster than the other, so they're playing this little catch-up game until the Earth gets fully into that field. And from that point forward, the vast changes that we're seeing with atmospheric disturbance, magnetosphere declines in this fashion where who knows if it's going to go from 60 to 20 in a year. You just don't know. Is it going to progress even further into some other declines? And, you're looking at where the magnetic field position the north-south polar, jumping around everywhere. And Ben's mapped it out pretty much where he thinks it might connect somewhere around Indonesia, west of Indonesia, above the equator there. I mean, how fast can all this onset? And how is it going to affect the human psyche? See, this resonance field's changing. You mentioned Taurus there. And astronomy and astrology used to be the same science, and they were dissected about 250 years ago. They were separated. But astronomy shows you the science behind where the planets are lying in their orbits, where our star is in terms of its orbit and then where we sit in the spiral arm of the galaxy. But the astrology explains the energetic frequency that this system passes through on a regular basis in a cycle. So for every 2,000 years, approximately 2,100, each one of these cycle sets is a different energy frequency. It's going to vibrate at either a lower density or a higher density. Faster vibration, things are going to move faster. They're going to be more light vibration, if you will. So the astrology explains the vibration pattern we're going to go through. And where we're going into Aquarius right now, things are going to be moving way faster. Magnetosphere is declining. Our brains are waking up and actuating in different ways that hadn't been seen at least in a couple of thousands of years. So the top-down approach of how to control a civilization, everybody's seeing through it because the vibratory patterns don't match anymore. They're stuck back in some kind of iron thing that's trying to, really control humanity's soul at the deepest levels versus freedom. And now, irregardless of what these systems are trying to control us as, there's other external forces that are awakening the human psyche. And I really think that's the reason that this divide and conquer has come into the family unit.
You talk about this awakening that's happening. Going back to your scenario where the guy clipped the branch and there was usable leaves on there. I still argue that if one of your guests or your woofers or a visitor takes back the leaves and steeps them and makes a tea, it is such an empowering event. You may have noticed this when you teach people things like this, that that is a wild, crazy idea for them to take a branch, to take the leaves and use it in some way. They have never done anything like that in their life. 99.99% of Americans have never done anything like that in their entire life. It is that little act of using nature, one way of putting it, connecting with nature, benefiting from nature is a really connecting idea. And that little event where they go home and steep the leaves, we do that sometimes with madrone berries or madrone bark. In fact, you can make a nice tea. And someone will do it, and it's so enlivening for them. And that's my point: is that it's fun to connect. It's empowering. It's inspiring. There's some awakening that happens when people, bit by bit, they might learn that little bit of technology, how to use that branch that he cut down. They might learn how to distill alcohol. Maybe it's some other, whatever it is. When we embrace this sustainable living, it ends up being deep, and it ends up being extremely satisfying.
And especially if you take somebody around and let them pick something from the field as well. I threw a few seeds last year, these wild mustard or mustard greens that came up, and picking it. Oh, can you help go pick some mustard greens? We'll throw it into the salad, and it's the same thing. Once it's added to a salad, and that can actually taste, and like, wow, that tastes very different. Or just all the lettuces that are still growing here. We got an enormous amount of lettuce, green onions. The basil got killed in the frost, but there's kale, cabbage, kohlrabi, and like the mustard. All that kind of cooler weather greens are all still in flourishing amounts here, and the lettuces too. So there's a lot of still things you can pick even in the winter that
being supported by a plant.
Yeah, it's not like winter you can't grow a thing, and that's most people's misnomer is, oh, it's winter, there's nothing, we got to go back to the supermarkets. But there's still an enormous amount of micronutrient and dense greens that will keep the roughage coming through also, and keep that immune system a little bit more bumped up than it would be if you were without those greens through the winter time.
Yeah, and especially you and I were talking pre-show about fertilizers.
Oh yeah, I wanted to go back to that. Yeah, please.
But there's also a magic. Not only can you eat from the plant that's right in front of you, you're literally, it's not coming from nowhere. It's not from Paraguay or Chile or Madagascar, where who knows what happened to it in a way when you know that plant. But something even deeper, we were talking about fertilizer. We use, I'll send you that article from National Geographic, a study that they produced with urine and ash. But when you burn wood in your stove and you save the ash and you save your urine, you've got to dilute it. And you use one of my books that I recommend everybody read is the Human Manure Handbook, how to compost your human manure, your feces. And there's another level of magic when you take what is your body, you compost it. You take the wood and you burn it, and something that comes out of your body, you're borrowing this water, the urine comes out, and you actually fertilize plants. Because as you said, fertilizers becoming more scarce. In years to come, there will not be fertilizer. We need to learn how to do this. But when you take urine and ash and feces, you compost all this, you make your own soil, and part of it comes from your body. And now that plant that you're eating, you're a part of it. It's super deep. You might intellectually know, oh, the cycle of life and it's all a part of us, but it's very different from actually planting the apple tree, peeing around the apple tree, composting, what goes inside of you, wood ash, you create these fertile soils, and then it grows and you eat the apple and it keeps on coming back. You are connected.
Yeah, having these solutions for, I was just looking out at the orchard here, the window, because this soil builder used to be about, I don't know, $16 a ton down at the local farm store here. Now it's 24. I think they said they were going to raise it up, probably 25, 26 by the end of the year here. But it's just what you're talking about, decomposed and broken down wood and different kind of wood, leaves and all this. And it gets broken down into what I say, like silk fiber type of wood decomposition. And you just put around all the trees out there to keep the weeds from growing up, but also to keep the moisture in there, and then have breakdown and build that natural soil and that drip periphery line of where the fruit trees are. Now it takes a little bit to get in there and get it started and stay on top of it. But even having that skill set of using that soil builder to then fluff your garden to have a little bit more aerated soil, because we're living in a real heavy clay area here. So to have the skill set to even the fortitude, or even to think in the future of setting a 6x6 pit somewhere where you're throwing things that are already semi-decomposed. When you're going through the forest and cleaning, you're going to come across those logs that are already well into the way of decomposition, and being able to throw those in the pile. And then, I've seen these different raised bed techniques of putting logs at the very bottom also as the base layer that decompose. And, think about wood as a soil builder. In addition to the wood ash, because you're always going to have fires, and don't be afraid by CO2 because you have a campfire. So they've demonized CO2 so badly that even you as just a person on your own land to have a campfire or burning some brush that you cleared out is almost considered an offense these days because you're releasing CO2. So don't buy into that. You're not the company that has mega fleets of ships cruising across the ocean. You're not the one that has a 25 million square foot factory and these types of things. They blame it on us, the people, but it's almost inverted 180. The advertisement tells you to buy two because they're on sale, yet the same companies support the NGOs to go around and say CO2 is bad, but it's the same companies that are producing all this CO2, creating the new carbon offset credit market, personal carbon allocation market as a base asset for the new currency that's going to be unveiled here shortly. It's all been just a giant circle. People are seeing through it.
I don't know if you ever listened to Joel Salatin.
I do. Yeah. I was actually considered going up to see him.
Yeah. Virginia, right?
Yeah. He's about 3 hours from here.
Oh, nice.
Polyface Farms. And by the way, that book is just a dynamite book to have. I got 2 copies in case, we need to take one up to the field and leave one for building. Cause we're thinking about the blue hens now. So little tiny ones. Yeah. Smaller eggs, tiny. They eat a lot of insects. They're really easy to keep. They're quiet and they're small. So they're going to stay, I wouldn't say off the radar more than like a guinea fowl that's going to be banging around, making a ton of noise out front.
I love Joel Salatin. He really speaks to me. And one of the things he said that resonates is that all farmers are soil farmers. In the end, it all has to do with the soil. And so it's just one of those skills we need to learn. And I think, flush toilets never made any sense to me. I always said that, one of those abstractions, if you use a toilet and you flush it and you have no idea where it goes and you don't care, then, it's another example of the cycle of nutrients in life being an abstraction. It just goes off to an expensive sewage treatment plant, and it usually goes into a landfill, and it's terribly not only wasteful of a valuable resource, but being an integral part of soil building, and is just one of those connecting to the land events that happen year in and year out. Hugelkulture, using ash and urine, or human manure composting.
Let me stop you for a second. See, that was a purposeful move there. It's like 6 birds with 1 stone. First, you don't know where it goes, so you're unaware that could be turned into a product first. So, and then you're into the, we need to take more taxes because we need to build out the municipalities. We need to build out the treatment plants. There's always upgrades. And then again, the landfill and that whole thing. But then, now you have to be relying on fertilizer and agrochemical companies instead of producing something locally. So think about how many facets have been removed of self-sustainability and more toward the systemic systems here, that you have to be on the teat of the government. They're the only ones that can process the water. They're the only ones who can process the waste. They're the only ones who can give you fertilizer. They're the only ones that can transport it safely. They're the only ones that X, Y, Z. And just that little tiny one example of where your waste goes after the toilet. Think how many things have gotten out of sync right there, and how much more dependence there is on systems from that bought for and taxes paid every time you buy from a corporation that is producing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those those holistic empowerment principles. When you learn you don't need the municipality or the fertilizer company that comes from China, and you can create your own fertilizer, it is empowering. And
so tell me about the yields. We talked yesterday a little bit about the yields. So ash and urine creating a fertilizer, because all numbers are leading. So just as a general, we're going to say 10%. It's not exact. 10% decline in global availability of petrochemical fertilizers, NPK, like 1010, 19, whatever you want to do, straight up nitrogen, and then the phosphorus or the potash that they use to really make plants grow in those maturation phases. That is going to be lacking just globally 10% next year. And if you look out, industry leader, you want to check out CF Industries. They're one of the largest fertilizer producers here in the US. On record, publicly, CEO comes out and says, get ready for food shortages. We're not going to have enough fertilizer. So add in your yields, what you would think the declines would be on per acre, per hectare yield on this much fertilizer not coming in. So let's say every farmer, we're just going to do an average here. Every farmer in the world has 10% less fertilizer to work with. So some areas like yours are going to be just fine because the bioaccumulation in the soil, it's already been built up. It's a healthy soil. So even if there's nothing added, it could still draw down on that for, a couple of seasons until it's added back to. But you go out in the middle of the Midwest, like Nebraska, where they're doing 20,000 acres on a single farm with those massive tractors, combines, you see, there's nothing in the soil except just dirt and then whatever they add to it to make plants grow. So the yield decline is not going to be just average across the board. There's going to be some areas that get better yield or sustained yield or maybe slight declines. But where they're heavily, heavily dependent on that, they're going to get massive declines. So a 10% reduction in fertilizer being used on a farm, how much do you think that will knock down per acre on the tonnage or on the bushels?
When you look at the coordinated attack, and for your audience, if you do not know it, if you do not understand this, there is so much information out there. We could talk for hours on it, that there is a coordinated attack on our worldwide agricultural system, from the decline in availability of fertilizers, which is a big deal, to they're paying farmers for their pig rights, so they can't ever farm pigs again. They're pouring out millions of gallons of milk. They're paying farmers not to farm, even to destroy their crops. There are some blatant attacks in a very diverse ways. You can't process it. You can't ship it. However you look at the entire system, there is an attack on our food system. And what it means is there's going to be shortages, and that food prices are going maybe this, but food prices are going up. And it's not a crazy idea. Look at history. They have controlled people with food for a long, long, long time. Ask the Soviets, ask the Chinese, and it's going to happen again.
And people like you and myself, we're prepared, but at 100% low, nothing's ever 100. I mean, we're prepared enough for at least what we see coming at us for some time. If it's going to last for the rest of our lives, we're definitely all going to have to shift in ways that we hadn't thought before. But for the average person, when the food that they don't grow themselves, because they don't even know how to supplement a salad. So, we were talking the other day about how much money we had saved by not buying produce during the entire summer. How much money that had really saved, eating fresh, huge, gigantic leafy salads every day. Sometimes we couldn't even finish the salad. I know it's a shame. It wilted, and if we didn't eat it in the morning for breakfast or something, it was kind of a loss, which hurt me a little bit. So we had to, tweak in the size of the salad so it wasn't so much wastage. Even now, we can still supplement with the salads with what we canned up during the summer of all the squash. We got a fair few pumpkins and butternut squashes still fresh that's there. Canned tomatoes, green beans, all that stuff we saved. We dehydrated a bunch of things. Peppers, and we made our own sun-dried tomatoes, and we had an enormous amount of stuff we made ourselves from what we grew this year, and huge money saving. So the average person that's going to the supermarket every week to feed their families and whatnot, they're going to get priced out of the game at some point. And how's that going to affect the stability of society where, the water cooler talk's all about food prices, not the game, that had previously been talked about. Oh, the Raiders did this. What did Browns do this weekend? That was water cooler talk, maybe a little bit of politics, but mainly it was fun stuff. But now what if water cooler talk is 100% food pricing, availability of food, where are you going to get the food? And my whole thing is, you can see the narrative playing out. And I'm not trying to be negative here, but I'm just trying what you see, and then how can you game it out and then figure out your safest move through that. This smash and grab kind of organized thing going on in California is getting so much news, and you just wonder why they were targeting like these 5-star, the high-end handbag places. I mean, in the world we're living in, is there still a need for it? Yeah, sort of, but it doesn't have the luster and the appeal like you said before. It kind of lost that. It really doesn't have that, I got to get the next bag and everything. That is sort of drifted away a little bit. I'm not going to say 100%, but that whole world we used to live in has sort of drifted a bit. So for these gangs to go smashing, 5-star rated store regions across they're going to go to Hermes first because they got the best shoes, whatever. That is a narrative to say that guards need to be stationed in every single store. Now, my feeling is with the fertilizer, I wouldn't say shortages, but not full availability of fertilizer next year is going to make food prices skyrocket. In turn, the next smash and grab organized types of events you'll see will be targeted toward food distribution points, could be supermarkets, whatever it is, food's going to be involved in it. And then you're going to see the next play is they're going to station troops in there and limit your availability to it, because cycles of history say there won't be enough food for everybody. They'll have to determine who and how to distribute it. And then this is where we get into, wow, it is amazing that there's something on your phone that's green or red that allows you to go into a store at this very moment, following right in line with that. So it's going to be 2022 is going to be the year of about food.
It's a steady march. It's
steady march. And 23 will be the year about sky sightings of anomalies that are beyond description, of plasma and color. And John Casey, his first book, Cold Sun, had a blue tinged sun on it. So if you're looking at spectral changes, I had a real good conversation with someone the other day. Maybe the sun is turning white because it's between colors. Because when I was a kid, it was yellow and orange. So if you go red, orange, yellow, blue, maybe we're in that point where it changes from that orangish yellow, and then it went white just before it's going to tinge into blue on the spectral. I'm not sure, but it seems like we might be between a color, because if you're going to shift between colors, there's going to have to be a middle point somewhere where that's just that tinge of neither before it flips to the next one. And maybe that's what that white sun that we're seeing now. And in short order, we'll see a green or a blue tinge to the sun, or our sky could turn more green, or something that is going to just shape the way that people really view their days and what's important around them at the moment. So 2023 could be perhaps the year of the moment, because nobody will be caring about the future. You'll be just concerned about this breath.
Yeah. One of my points of emphasis is really believing our own experience, with the pandemic. Look around you. Look around. Look at your own experience. You look around you. Do you have a reason to be afraid? Only because of information, people are afraid. And if you look around you and know if you're over age 40, I think, the sun used to be yellow. The sun has turned white. We got to believe our own experience. And as we see changes in weather and climate and effects of light, of the sun, and of animals and animal patterns, as we see these changes, there are real signs. We need to believe our own experience.
And the human side too. See, that's one thing that nobody's really talking about, the human psyche changes that are going to arrive at the same time, these energetic changes sweeping through the solar system here. I mean, that is the wildest card, X22, X1000 factor that nobody even wants to discuss. Magnetic field changes and how the brain is going to perceive reality, because the magnetic hemispheres of your brain are going to change right along with that weakening magnetic field.
Yeah, it's so just going to keep our eyes out. And people changes are a big deal. We can already see people changes. Anyways, Dave, thank you for the interview and the great conversation. I need to go take care of
some soil building time.
Soil building, maybe.
All right, Dan Schultz. I'll leave the links in the description box below. So if you want to check out what they're doing with the project, get a hold of Dan yourself. And I do wish you the best in your preps. Things are changing fast. So tomorrow, hey, you know what? This afternoon is going to be a great day to do something new. Thanks for watching. See you next time. I need to go get the couple cords of wood for the wood burning stoves, because they're already anticipating power outages here coming up. If there's a lack of power in Virginia, they're going to reroute power from TVA, and they're going to start throwing us to rolling brownouts here. And they're going to reroute the power up to DC, Quantico, and whatever other podunk wannabe government place is going to try to pilfer electricity from those who have it. You're telling me that because Washington, D.C. didn't anticipate and they wanted to go green and put windmills offshore, that because they're not going to have enough power because the wind's not blowing, that they're going to steal our electricity off the hydro down here in Tennessee and send it up there?
Yeah.
What a bunch of scammers.
Yeah, wasn't it? But it's so blatant right now. You and I are up on this stuff, but it's still nearly unbelievable to me. Some of the absurdities and the blatant, from criminal to corrupt to just dumb, it's nearly unbelievable.
Yeah, and Iceland's rationing power because their hydro and geothermal isn't cranking. They're having sort of some issues with water flow into the dams because of one of the volcanoes. So now their hydro's not working, and they've taken offline all cryptocurrency mining operations, all smelting, and there was some other thing there that they were limiting. Yeah, they were hitting 3 industries in Iceland to cut power consumption because they just don't have the power. And they were the poster child of renewability with the geothermal and Tennessee is pretty well set. They got nuclear and hydro here. Same thing in Iceland. They had the geothermal and the hydro, but now the hydro's not working. So now they're in a conundrum too. Now, all these people pinning their hopes on having, free air conditioning by being in Iceland so they don't have to run the mining farms at high temperature. And just there's not enough electricity now for the crypto mining farms and industry and smelting and a few other processes involving super heavy power intensity to
Crypto
continue
mining
running in
takes a
Iceland.
lot.
Yeah, they're cutting all those industries so people have power so they don't riot on the streets.
Mining crypto takes a lot of energy.
Oh, intensive. Yeah. Well, one of the most intensive mining parts is keeping the facility cool.
Yeah.
So that's why they chose Iceland, because it's always cold up there. Well, relatively. I mean, you get a couple months of summer, but relatively for the rest of the year, you do have zero input costs. They just channel cool air from outside to keep the facility cooled off. And then they're getting subsidies and nearly free power to run the rigs and get all that done. But now, since power is at a premium and not forthcoming for the average citizen because of all the low water levels, well, it's a conundrum. And it's in your face and everywhere. Everything's in your face right now. See, I think the Great Awakening, there's too much in everybody's faces that you're like, that's the opposite of what I learned. That's the opposite of what I was told. That's the opposite. That makes no sense. They're stealing from us there. Wait, ineptitude over here. The broken system continues to be a black hole for money over here. Wait a second. Why are we still putting money in that black hole over there? You know, it's so in your face on so many levels anymore that there is really an awakening happen, because it's laid bare for all to see pretty much at the moment.
It is, if you got the eyes to see it.
Let's kick it in with the ears.